Hello and welcome back to another episode of Not Another Money podcast. Yes, to being consistent with these episodes. Hopefully, you're enjoying the new episodes that have been released since we've come back from our long hiatus. And if you are enjoying these conversations and you're enjoying the show, please do subscribe to the show, give it a thumbs up, like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff, and share it with a friend or family member too, because it really does help with the podcast's growth and reach. And it helps also with morale and motivation to keep creating this content for you, because yes, I enjoy creating these podcast episodes and I enjoy sharing all about financial education and about my own money story, and also interviewing experts and sharing all of these money insights with you guys. But all of it does take time and energy, and as I'm investing in this platform in terms of the labor of love, it would help to get that support from you guys in the form of you subscribing and engaging and commenting and sharing. So let's make a deal. You guys engage and share and like and subscribe, and I will continue to provide you guys with these valuable episodes and hopefully start getting on some amazing guests again like I did in the last season. So I'm really excited for this next phase of Not Another Money podcast. I'm really excited for where the podcast is going to go and for all the amazing lives it's going to touch and transform, and how much it's going to help you guys on your financial journey. But that's enough of my pre-ramble anyway. Let's get into today's conversation. Hello and welcome to Not Another Money podcast. Why is it called Not Another Money podcast, you may be wondering? It's because this is not your typical money show. Get ready for real money conversations and lessons, expert insights from some of our very special guests, and hear some really inspiring stories from everyday people. On this podcast, you're going to learn how to earn more, how to spend less, how to grow the difference, and most importantly, live your best financial life. It is the month of February and it is the month of love, and that's going to be the theme for the next few episodes. We're going to be talking all about money and relationships in different capacities. So if that's something that's of interest to you, definitely stick around. You're going to want to make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss the next few episodes where we're going to be talking all about love and money, because yeah, I think it's a really important one. I think in this day and age, when it comes to the topic of money and relationships, it can be quite taboo, and it can be also a lot of unnecessary conversations that take place around these topics. And when I say unnecessary conversations, what I mean by that is conversations that are not going to have real impact on your life and are not going to be really fundamental and instrumental in how successful that relationship turns out to be. So, for example, those conversations about who's going to pay on the first date, for example, those are such trivial conversations to be having. And the fact that you can have a whole podcast episode dedicated to that conversation, it's just so redundant. So hopefully over the course of the next few episodes, I can really bring you guys some value on the topic of money and relationships. I'm by no means a relationship expert. Yes, I have been married for a number of years, 14 years, 15 in July actually. So 15 years in this game and still going strong, still going great. And I've definitely learned a lot over the last 15 years that I think can be of value to somebody, hopefully. And then also equally, there's just so much I've learned from other people that I know who are married and have been married even longer than myself. So I'm blessed to be in a community whereby I see so many successful marriages and I see what it takes to be successful in marriage. And I've learned so much from those people. So definitely want to come and share some of those insights and some of the things that have helped me and helped my friends and helped people that I know in their relationship when it comes to the matter of money and relationships. And what I hope to do also over the next few weeks is get a guest on who is also an expert on the topic of money and relationships, and he's actually recently published a book on the topic. So I will share more about that on an upcoming episode. So definitely watch this space and I will share more details in due course. But with that being said, that was quite a long introduction, but let's get into the heart of today's conversation. I think it's only right to begin this series on money and relationships by addressing the topic of money in relationships when it comes to dating, even before entering into marriage. These kind of conversations that can help make or break the relationship moving forward. I think this would be a really interesting topic to explore, because the reality is a lot of times it's not money that causes issues in relationships. A lot of the issues are down to expectations that we place on one another. A lot of times money issues are not even about the numbers. They're all about these assumptions that were never said out loud or spoken to one another. Why do I think it's so important to have conversations about money before entering into marriage? Well, there's a number of reasons, to be honest, but I think fundamentally the misconception a lot of people have is that these money conversations are conversations that you address once you enter into marriage. So when you're in marriage, then you can talk about how you're going to navigate your financial future and what you want to do with your money and how you're going to manage money as a household, and whether you're going to pool it together, whether you're going to do 50-50, 100 zero, whatever it's going to be. Those are the conversations you have later down or further down the line, or at least once you are about to get married, if not even yet entered into the marriage. I think also the misconception or the idea is that, we don't need to talk about money until things get very serious, or when there's some kind of crisis or some kind of financial problem that we need to address and resolve together. But I think by then sometimes it's too late because these expectations have already been set. And I think then what tends to happen is people proceed into marriage and then they just enter the marriage with these expectations of what that person should be like financially and whose role and responsibility money matters and affairs should be, oftentimes based on what we've seen modeled by our parents or our caregivers growing up. And I think the main problem with this is that you've come in with expectations, they've come into the relationship with their own expectations. But if you haven't had these transparent money conversations, you're expecting something that may not become a reality, and it can cause friction and tension unnecessarily just because it's something you haven't addressed prior to entering into that marriage. And I think the big issue here is that you don't realize there's an issue, or you don't realize how different your viewpoints are when it comes to money is, until something arises and then it needs to be addressed. And by then, often it's too late because that's when conflict starts to arise. And while these conversations might seem a bit boring or a bit uncomfortable or a bit awkward to have early on in a relationship, I think they're necessary. And it's not about ruining the romance in a relationship or, making things too serious and too boring. Actually, I think having these grown adult conversations early on can protect the relationship. So when I say to have conversations about money early on in a relationship before you even proceed to marriage, what kind of conversations are we going to have, and how do you approach these subjects? Or, just kind of killing the vibe in the moment. I think choosing the right time to have that conversation is key here. And then I think also what you bring up by way of money conversations is also important. So what exactly are the kind of conversations that you want to address early on in that relationship? I think conversations around what money means to you would be a really good place to start. So when we talk about money, how do you value money, or how do you see money? Because how we see money and how we perceive money has a big impact on how we then go on to handle money further down the line. So yes, it may seem like a simple concept, but actually it's quite foundational in your relationship with money and how you kind of model money in your home, because ultimately money means different things to different people. So for some people, money equals safety, security, and stability. But other people don't see money in that way. They see it as money for freedom, enjoyment, YOLO. And then there's others that have quite a negative view of money, where they see money as stress or control or even anxiety inducing. And so it's so important to understand what money means to that person that you're with. I think a great way to identify what money means to an individual is to understand their background when it comes to money. So what their childhood was like when it came to the topic of money. So a great question to ask could be, what was money like in your household growing up? Was it something that your parents talked about? Was it something they talked about to you? Did you have enough money growing up, or did you have very limited resources and finances growing up? Did you have an abundance of money growing up? Was money a source of argument or contention in your home growing up? Or was money something that just never got spoken about, but you had it? The different answers that come up when you ask these questions can help to create an understanding and a picture for you of what that person's view and relationship with money is. That, and them really addressing and unpacking what they saw growing up and how it impacted them, can really help you to understand each other by way of the position that they hold when it comes to money and how they perceive money. Because that will be a great indicator for you of how they will handle money moving forward in your relationship. For example, if they grew up in a household where money was scarce, they may then have a money hoarder mindset where they hoard money. So whenever they get money, they hold on to it. They could be stingy with their money, or they could be the total end of the spectrum and be quite frivolous with their money, because they're like, money comes, money goes, and I'm not used to having money. So when the money does come, I have to spend it quickly because I don't know if I'm going to get this opportunity again. So all of these different foundational experiences that we've had with money growing up have a really big impact on how we perceive money and how we handle money. And depending on the different ends of the spectrum that you've both come from, it's going to have a big impact on how you both view money going into that relationship and how you manage the money as a household. Initiating this kind of conversation with your partner could go well or not so well, depending on where they are with their relationship with money and how comfortable they are with addressing their relationship with money. If you're in a relationship with someone and you try to have this conversation with them and try and find out a bit more about their money background, at first they might not be open to the conversation and they might just be like, I don't want to address this right now. And To an extent, this can be fine, but if you've tried on several occasions and they just don't want to have a conversation with you about money, I would say that's a little bit of a red flag, because why don't you want to have this conversation with me? Like, when are we going to have this conversation? I can't marry someone and not understand what their relationship is like with money, because just having these kind of conversations can really make you aware of where their mindset is at when it comes to their finances. So I'm not telling them or telling you to get them to expose their life story to you, but a little bit of transparency so that you can see the bigger picture would be very helpful and is needed. So I think somebody that is not open to opening up about their finances whatsoever, or not open to even having this conversation, or not open to sharing about their relationship with money, I would say it's a red flag, because what are you hiding and why don't you want to have this conversation with me? I think there's a big difference between them being like, oh, I feel uncomfortable having this conversation, because then maybe you might need to change your approach in having this conversation with them, or maybe pick a different time to try and have this conversation again. But if they're just literally like blase, or just, outright like, no, I don't want to have this conversation, and no, not now, not ever, then yes, I would say that that is a red flag, because if we're not going to speak about this ever, then how can we really progress? I think we really want to get to the space where you're actually both comfortable with having this conversation and having that transparency and vulnerability when it comes to your personal finances. So judgment free, shame free, just open, honest conversations about what you saw, about the relationship you had with money growing up, the examples that you had, how that impacted you, and what you want to do about it moving forward. Because, yeah, we're adults at the end of the day. We've all come from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different experiences, but our experiences can help shape us. But your start doesn't have to be your end. And just because, for example, you may not have seen the greatest examples modeled to you, that does not mean that you should by any means say, no, I can't pursue this relationship with this person because they've had a bad upbringing with money. You just want to make sure that they're aware of where they are and are taking steps towards course correcting moving forward with their finances. So once you've addressed their childhood experience with money and their experience with money growing up, you don't want to probe into where they are right now financially. So I'm not saying you need to find out exactly how much his salary is, although there's no harm in knowing that information, to be honest. But some people don't want to be transparent about their salaries for whatever reason, which I guess dating is a bit of a different conversation to when you've married, because why are you hiding your salary from me when we're married? But when you're dating, I totally understand maybe you want to, keep your cards a bit closer to your chest, which is fair enough. However, I feel like there are certain conversations that we still do need to have when we are dating, so that you know what you are going to get yourself into if you are going to marry this person. So it's different conversation if you're just dating for dating's sake, and you don't see a future with this person. But if you do see a future with this person and you want to tie the knot and you want your lives to become one, then it's so important that you have this conversation with that person. So this conversation is all around now, the present here and now. How much debt do you currently have or not have? What is your spending like? This is something that you can observe even without having that conversation, but at the same time it is good to hear what they think they're spending versus what you're observing they're spending. So for example, you could have that conversation and the person could tell you that they have zero debt and that they're really good with money and they're not a big spender. But then as you're going out with them, you might notice certain patterns of behavior with their spending. For example, they could eat takeaways every single day. When they go grocery shopping, they could just they could just buy whatever they want to buy. And then you go to their house and the fridge is full of expired groceries that they didn't end up using. There's just little patterns of behavior that you can observe in that person, which will tell you what kind of a spender they are, even more so than what they tell you from their mouth. I think when you have these conversations about money, when you're asking somebody about their spending behaviors and their debt and their financial position right now, it's not to shame anybody or make anyone feel uncomfortable or awkward. It's just to have that transparency. It's all about honesty, and it's all about knowing where you are right now, and then we have a good understanding of where we're starting from and where we're going. Because I remember when my husband and I were dating and we were considering getting married, I remember us having this same conversation about our current financial position. And at that time, I was the one in debt. He didn't have any debt. I had my overdraft, which was maxed out, that student overdraft back then, which they pitched to us as free money, which ended up not being free money, because once I graduated, my bank wanted their money back with interest. And at the time when I got that student loan, I wasn't thinking about the fact that I was going to have to pay this money back with interest a few years later once I graduated. But lo and behold, that time came and they were chasing me for their money, and it was not nice. But anyway, I digress. That's the debt that I had at that time. So he could have looked at that situation and been like, this girl is not serious about money. She's got £3,000 worth of debt. I don't want to take on this baggage. And that could have been the end of that. But actually, he was like, okay, you've got this debt. What's the plan? And actually, as we were still dating, I worked to pay that debt off even before we got married. So by the time we got married, I was debt free. But equally, it could have been the case that we were getting married sooner, or I had a greater amount of debt, and he would have probably worked, well, I would like to think anyway, he would have worked with me through that debt situation, and we would have paid off that debt together, or at least he would have given me that room to pay off that debt, and then maybe contributed less towards the household until I had paid that debt off. And when it comes to having conversations with your partner about debt, you don't want it just to be a generic conversation like, oh yeah, I've got debt. Oh yeah, me too, I've got debt. It's like, no, we really need to understand what that debt is, because £1,000 credit card debt is very different to £5,000 worth of payday loans, because the interest is a lot higher and the amount that you owe is a lot higher. So when we say debt, can we quantify this a little bit? Let's be clear on how much we owe and to who. Do you just have one creditor, or do you have 10? Do you have bailiffs knocking on your door every other week, or do you have a car finance deal that you're unable to keep up with the payments for? Like, just really, let's understand what kind of debt we have and how bad is it. Have you been passed on to a debt collection agency? Do you have 1,000 unpaid parking tickets that you're still being chased for payment? Let's really get clear on what the picture is. Again, this isn't a judgment thing. We're not doing this to expose that person or make them feel less than or make them feel like inadequate or anything like that. It's just really so that we know what we're getting ourselves into, so that we can make an informed decision as to whether this is something I want to continue pursuing or not. In addition to knowing how much debt the person has, or who the creditors are, or how many creditors even that the person has, I think it would be good to kind of understand what they think about that debt and how they feel about that debt, because there's a difference between being in debt and being intentional about paying that debt off versus being in debt and burying your head in the sand and pretending that that debt is not an issue and not trying to do anything about it. Or there could be a being in debt and just getting yourself into more and more and more debt, because rather than trying to address it, you're just trying to take out more debt to pay off that debt, and it's just a vicious downward spiral. Like, where are we at on that debt journey, and how do we feel about it? Because that is an indicator of the steps that the person is going to take towards debt freedom. And then you can decide on whether or not you want to go on that journey with them. And then when it comes to spending as well, yes, you can say, yes, I'm a spender, or yes, I'm a saver, but actually, what do your actions say? Find out if they live by a budget. And if they say they do live by a budget, what does that actually mean? Because a lot of people say they budget, but they budget in their head. And budgeting in your head is as good as not having a budget, because there's no real plan there and there's nothing concrete that you can refer back to or use to hold yourself accountable to. A lot of people say that they budget, but in reality, they're just winging it. That was me for many, many years. I used to say I budgeted in my head, but actually, I was just winging it with my finances, paying my bills on time and hoping for the best. But actually, when I started getting intentional with my finances, that's when I sat down and created a physical budget. You can grab the template in the description box below if you want, and use the same template that I use to manage my finances. That's just a quick shameless plug, because why not? The most important thing is to understand what they are doing when it comes to the management of their finances, and find out if they're really intentional about how they manage their money, or whether they're just kind of, winging it, free spirited, go with the flow. Because if you're somebody that does budget and you are very meticulous and you're very diligent with your finances, you can see how that can quickly cause contention in the household if one of you is just spending, 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 and the other person is trying to live by the book or live by the budget. I have a very controversial opinion, but I'm going to share it anyway, because why not? It's my podcast. No, but seriously, I don't think that love can cancel out the financial reality. Yes, you may love him, but if he's not financially responsible, is that something you want to commit to? Is this something you can commit to? Because the reality is, you do not marry potential, you marry patterns. So look out for those red flags in his patterns of behavior. If he's somebody that's very frivolous with money, he minimizes any kind of debt that he has, he's very vague and he avoids details when it comes to money, or he often makes jokes about him being so bad with money, but he doesn't show you any kind of desire to improve his finances, those are red flags that you really want to run from. Yes, it might seem fun in the moment. He whisks you off on these romantic weekend getaways, or he lavishes you with all the nicest gifts in the world, but that's fine temporarily, but long term you need stability. And if his lifestyle does not match what he does for a living, or does not match his income, then further down the line that is going to lead to problems. So yes, it's fun when you're not financially tied to him, but when you're living together in the same house and you're married and he's telling you, I bought you this Coach bag, but he has no money to pay your mortgage, then that's going to be a big issue. You want to really make sure that no matter how much or how little he's earning, he's somebody that's a good steward of his finances and he's responsible with his money. And likewise for her too. So this isn't just at in the men. This works both ways. You want to try and get with someone that is financially responsible, have got their head on their shoulders, or at the very least is willing to learn or is aware of their shortcomings and is working to improve. Because the worst thing you want is somebody that is wrong and strong. So once you've had a conversation about their background and their upbringing, and now you have a good understanding of where they currently are financially, whether they've got debt, how bad they are with money, how good they are with money, you don't want to go on to a conversation about what money's going to look like for the two of you once you come together and get married. Because this is a really huge conversation to have. And it's one that people don't like to have. You want to have these conversations about work after children, stay at home parenting, what will happen when you're on maternity leave or paternity leave, who's taking maternity leave versus who's not taking maternity leave, what's going to happen once the children are young. Are you going to put them in nursery, or are you expecting her to go back to work straight away, or how long can she have off of work? Will she go part-time instead of full-time like she was doing before the kids came? These are the kind of conversations you want to have. Yes, it's all hypothetical, and yes, things can change, and the decision you make today may be different to the one that you have tomorrow once the children actually come, because hindsight is 2020. However, it's good to at least try and have these initial conversations so you have a rough idea of where you're both steering and what you both think. And then, yes, of course, there's room to maneuver, but let's at least start off on the same page. You also want to talk about breadwinning and what providing actually looks like. Like, men always say they want to protect and provide, right? But what does provide look like? Are you providing half, or you're providing everything? And with your providing everything, what does that entail? So are you covering all the bills, or are you covering the main expensive bills and I cover the variable expenses? Are we pulling all our money together and my money is your money and your money is my money? Am I going to give the bigger percentage because I earn more, or are you going to give the biggest percentage because you earn more? All of these different stipulations, you want to have this conversation to find out where his head's at and where your head's at and how you're going to compromise and find a way to work together. It all goes back to expectations versus reality again, because if you don't speak about things and you don't have these conversations beforehand, you just have your expectation based on what you've always known, and likewise he has his expectation based on what he's known. So none is necessarily right or wrong depending on what you're happy with, but the main thing is that you have these conversations so that you can find a happy middle ground that works for you both. I think another important conversation to have is around the saving, giving, and generosity, particularly when it comes to like family, extended family, and other financial commitments that you might have. For example, I know of situations whereby a partner has family back home that they have to send money to. So if you're somebody that isn't generous and you're getting with somebody that literally looks after his whole village, then that's going to be a cause of contention. You're just going to, after a while, start resenting the fact that he's always giving money to everybody else. So really have those conversations early on to understand your partner's nature on this topic of giving and generosity, and work out if it's something that you can come in alignment with, and work out if it's something that you can accept. I remember I was on a podcast a couple of years back, and that same conversation actually came up, and the lady was asking what should she do because her husband's always giving money to his mum. And I'll share the answer that I gave on that podcast. And I basically said that, to be honest, that's not a bad problem to have. The fact that the husband is generous, that means he's a loving, compassionate, and kind person, and he wants to be a blessing to his family, which is never a bad thing. However, I do think conversations need to be had about boundaries around giving. So yes, you can give a amount, but let's sit down and agree what that amount will be and the occasions that we are able to give that amount. So for example, you could say we have a £300 giving pot every month, which you can give to your family, which I won't ask any questions about. Beyond that, let's have a conversation about it and let's see if it's financially viable for us. But I think if it gets to a stage where it's irresponsible giving, then we really need to have a real conversation about that. And when I say irresponsible giving, I would say, for example, you know that you haven't got enough money to pay for the car this month. However, your mum has just said, oh, we need to send money to uncle whose grandma has died and we need to pay for her funeral. And then you're sending the money for the car payment to Nigeria or whatever country you're from to pay for this funeral of this distant relative when you've got your family at home. So I think when the giving is to your own detriment is when we need to sit down and have that conversation. But I think that act of them being generous and being a giver and being liberal cannot be is not a bad thing in itself, but it does need to have boundaries around it and needs to be managed well. If you're a generous person and you value giving, but you're with somebody that sees it as wasteful, it's going to become a topic of contention unnecessarily. So again, that's why you really want to have this conversation beforehand and have an understanding of your views and values on this topic so it doesn't cause friction in your household further down the line. I think another important conversation to have is about how we're going to manage money in the household. So, yes, you're a giver, I'm an expender, you're a saver, you're in debt, like all these conversations we've had, which is great. But okay, how are we actually going to manage money when we come together as a household? Who's going to make the decisions and how are the decisions going to be made? This again is another conversation that needs to be had that might not be the most comfortable conversation to have. A lot of couples argue a lot on the topic of money, and oftentimes it's not about the money itself, it's more about the power and the control of that money. We really want to be transparent about how we're going to manage money when we come together. So, who's better with money? Is it me or is it you? Is it something that I don't really want to have control over? Just tell me what's happening. Just give me the summary at the start of the month or at the end of the month. Like these kind of conversations, again, will be great to have in advance before you enter into marriage. But equally, these are conversations you do need to revisit as time progresses too. As much as these conversations that I've said to have are quite challenging and can be uncomfortable, I think avoiding them will be even more problematic. But I really want to be clear on the fact that I'm not trying to say that by having all these conversations before you get married, it's going to be smooth sailing once you enter into marriage, or that the conversations that you have now determine what the outcome is going to be further down the line. Things do change, people change, your opinions change, your experiences change, your outlook change. All these things do change, but at least let's have a starting point. And I think that's the main thing I want to get across in this episode is that you just want to make sure you're having those transparent, awkward, and uncomfortable money conversations as soon as you can so that you know what you're working with and you know what you're working towards. It's not about having everything figured out before you get married or being completely debt free before you get married or even agreeing on every single point in terms of how you're going to manage your finances or your experience with money or your plans for money for your future. I think the main goal here is just all about honesty, transparency, openness, and just the willingness to have these awkward conversations about money. Whether you're in the stage of dating or you're engaged or you're preparing for marriage or you're even early on into your marriage, I think these conversations are just so helpful and so useful because, as we've spoken about throughout this episode, it's not about having everything perfect before you enter into marriage. It's just about protection. It's about understanding. It's about transparency and it's about ultimately growth together. As I mentioned earlier on in the show, money does not cause problems in relationship. A lot of times it's the unspoken expectations that cause the problems. So if you've made it this far in this episode and it's got you thinking about expectations financially in relationships, please do share this episode with someone that you're building with or someone that you believe will benefit from this conversation. If you made it this far in the episode and you haven't given it a thumbs up and you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, please do subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast on all the podcast streaming platforms, share it with a friend or family member. And as usual, I will see you on the next one.